What would you do if a little boy pointed at a grave and whispered, "Ma'am,
Mommy,
those
is he
kids live in
sleeping
my
under
building?"
there?
Imagine carrying grief for years, only to hear a child say something that could turn your entire world upside down. Before we go on, allow me to wish you peace and good health. Tell me from which country and at what time are you watching this story? On a quiet autumn morning in Asheville, a woman kneels at a grave she has visited every Sunday for 3 years until a trembling child interrupts a ritual shaped by grief. The air still carried the faint chill of last night's rain, the kind that settles into the old stones of Riverside Cemetery and lingers there like a memory. Evelyn Marlowe moved slowly across the winding path, her boots brushing through fallen maple leaves, the color of burnt sugar. She held a small bouquet of wildflowers gathered just after dawn, their stems tied with a piece of twine she kept from an old family craft project. It was a Sunday ritual, steady, silent, unbroken. She reached the familiar headstone near the crest of the hill. The engraving caught the soft light. Aidan Marlowe, Lyndon Marlowe. Kneeling, she placed the bouquet at the base, smoothing the petals with a gentleness that suggested a conversation long ongoing. She whispered something only the morning breeze could hear, a tender greeting she had repeated hundreds of times. No tears came anymore. Grief had settled differently now, quiet, heavy, like a blanket that never warmed. A gust of wind rustled the last few golden leaves overhead, and Evelyn looked up, startled by the soft shuffle of small shoes on gravel. A boy, thin, freckled, no more than 8, stood a few feet away. He clutched his own bundle of flowers, awkward and mismatched, as though picked without knowing their names. His gaze moved from the stone to Evelyn, then back again, unsure if he should speak. She offered a small, tired smile, the kind people give strangers in sacred places. Before she could say a word, the boy asked in a trembling voice, "Ma'am, are those your boys?" His question was gentle, yet it struck with unexpected force. Evelyn cleared her throat. "Yes," she managed. "They were." The boy shifted, gripping his flowers tighter. His hair was blown slightly out of place, and his backpack hung loosely from one shoulder. Something about him felt familiar, not in appearance, but in the soft uncertainty he carried. Evelyn watched him take a small step closer, his eyes fixed on the names engraved in polished stone, as though they meant something to him. She felt a flicker of curiosity rise beneath the quiet sorrow she had worn for so long. The boy hesitated before speaking again, his voice barely above a whisper. I've seen them. They live in my building." The words landed strangely, almost dreamlike. For a moment, Evelyn didn't react at all. Her mind simply refused to understand. She blinked, searching his young face for confusion. Maybe for mistaking the names with someone else's? But the boy's eyes held a frightened honesty that no child could fake. She opened her mouth, then closed it, suddenly aware of the thundering in her own chest. "What do you mean?" she finally asked, her voice fragile. The boy didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out 2 small square photographs, Polaroids, their colors slightly faded. He held them out with both hands, as if afraid they might fall apart. Evelyn took them carefully. The world around her seemed still. The rustling leaves, the far-off hum of a car on Birch Street all dimming as she focused on the images. 2 boys sitting in a dim room with concrete walls. One slightly older than the other, thin, quiet, their eyes empty in a way that felt painfully familiar. But it was their faces, their features, that made her breath falter. She knew those faces. She had kissed those cheeks, brushed that messy hair from their foreheads, tucked them into bed on nights when thunderstorms shook the windows. Aidan, Lyndon, older, but unmistakably them. Her hands trembled so hard the photos nearly slipped. The sky seemed to tilt, and she gripped the edge of the gravestone to steady herself. She turned the Polaroids over, finding a few messy words written in childish handwriting. "Apartment 3B, help." A wave of cold rolled down her back. She looked up, but the boy had taken a cautious step away, as though afraid he'd done something wrong. Before she could ask more, he spoke one last time, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "They told me their mom's name was Evelyn, like yours." He stood there for only a heartbeat longer, then shifted his backpack and quietly walked toward the cemetery gate, leaving her alone with the wildflowers, the headstone, and the photographs that shook the ground beneath her feet. The photos slip from Evelyn's fingers as the wind stirs the leaves, because for the first time in 3 years, doubt feels more real than grief. Evelyn remained motionless long after the boy disappeared beyond the arched gate. The quiet of the cemetery settled in again, but it no longer felt gentle. The world she had learned to endure Sundays at the grave, the careful arrangement of flowers, the polite nods to strangers visiting their own losses felt suddenly thin, like a fragile curtain tugged aside by a truth she wasn't ready to see. The Polaroids lay in her palm, their glossy surfaces warming against her skin as if urging her to look again, to accept what her mind refused to let in fully. She stood slowly, joints stiff from kneeling, and brushed the leaves from her coat. The photographs trembled between her fingers. She held them up to the pale autumn light filtering through the bare branches overhead. The boys in the images stared back silent, exhausted, and heartbreakingly alive. A rush of memory rose in her. Aiden learning to tie his shoes backward, Lyndon crying whenever she turned off the porch light at bedtime, their laughter echoing through the old kitchen. She had mourned those sounds for years. Now the possibility of hearing them again struck her with a force that almost buckled her knees. Evelyn pressed the photos against her chest, hugging them the way she used to hold her sons after a scraped knee or a bad dream. "My boys," she whispered, her breath shaky. The words felt unfamiliar, as though she'd borrowed them from a past life. She looked again toward the cemetery gate where the child had stood. Who was he? Why did he know them? And how had her sons, children she had buried, ended up in someone's apartment? The chill deepened, not from the air, but from the thought threading through her mind. What if the grave she visited wasn't theirs at all? The drive home was a blur. Leaves swirled along the edges of Riverside Drive as she made her way back into town, but she barely saw them. Her hands tightened around the steering wheel each time the images returned, the dim room, the boys' thin shoulders, the hollow look in their eyes. She replayed every detail, every possibility, her heart bouncing between hope and terror. If they were alive, why had no one told her? Who would hide children from their mother? And who had convinced the world they were gone? Back at her small apartment overlooking a quiet street in North Asheville, she set her keys on the counter and leaned heavily against the cabinets. The day felt unreal, as if she'd woken in a story someone else had written. She laid the Polaroids on the kitchen table where the morning sun used to fall when she still made 2 lunchboxes. Now, the light seemed colder. The clock ticked on the wall, steady and indifferent to her spinning thoughts. Evelyn sat down slowly, folding her arms on the table as if bracing herself against the weight of the truth. She examined the writing on the back again. Apartment 3B, help. The letters were uneven, scrawled in the hurried hand of a frightened child, someone who didn't know how else to reach an adult who might listen. She inhaled deeply, the kind of breath one takes before stepping into cold water. She tried to think clearly. Maybe she should call someone. The police? CPS? But what would she tell them? A stranger's child handed her 2 photos and claimed her dead sons lived next door? She knew how it sounded irrational, desperate, the sort of wild hope grief sometimes invented to soothe itself. She had spent 3 years convincing herself not to chase shadows. But the faces in the photos weren't shadows. When dusk settled and the first streetlights flickered on outside, she was still sitting there. Her fingers drifted over a grainy detail in one photo, a chipped blue mug on the floor beside Aiden. She remembered buying that exact mug in a dollar store when he said Blue made cereal taste like superheroes. Tears slipped down her cheeks before she even realized they had formed. The boy's voice echoed in her head again, small and trembling. "They told me their mom's name was Evelyn." Something shifted inside her. Not just hope, but a kind of awakening. 3 years of sorrow had made her still, almost numb. Now everything in her came alive at once. Fear, love, fury, resolve. She rose from the table with a steadiness she hadn't felt in years. She placed the Polaroids into her coat pocket as carefully as someone carrying something sacred. She didn't know exactly what she would do next, but she knew she couldn't go back to the quiet grief that had governed her life. Not now. Not after this. Outside, the street echoed with the muted hum of passing cars, porch lights glowing against the nearing winter dusk. Evelyn stepped onto the small balcony of her apartment and looked toward the distant rooftops of Montford, where the boy had said her sons lived. The wind carried the faint smell of wood smoke, and with it came a single, undeniable thought. The photos slip from Evelyn's fingers as the wind stirs the leaves because for the first time in 3 years, doubt feels more real than grief. Morning came softly over Asheville, casting a pale gold wash across the rooftops of North Asheville as Evelyn stepped outside. She hadn't slept. Her mind had carried her through long corridors of memory and fear, circling back to the same impossible truth. 2 boys alive in an apartment a child claimed to share a wall with. She walked down the steps of her building with a purposeful calm that surprised her. The world around her moved slowly, dog walkers out early, neighbors collecting their newspapers. The distant hum from Marymount Avenue drifting through bare branches. Everything looked the same, yet nothing felt familiar. She followed the sidewalk toward Montford, with the steady gait of someone carrying a fragile secret in her coat pocket. The Polaroids brushed against her side with each step, a small reminder that there was no turning back to the quiet rhythm she'd lived before sunrise. As she approached the neighborhood, the houses shifted to the old craftsman porches and tall oaks that Montford was known for. She paused near the intersection, letting her eyes trace the facades, searching for something, anything that might connect the photographs to the real world in front of her. Just as she turned the corner past a row of maples losing their last leaves, she saw him. The same boy from the cemetery was sitting alone on a low concrete step outside a brick apartment building. He had his backpack again, though today it looked heavier, as if he had stuffed too much into it. His shoulders were hunched, and his gaze was fixed on the sidewalk, as though he was trying to forget the conversation he'd begun the day before. Evelyn approached slowly, not wanting to startle him. When her shadow reached his shoes, he looked up. Recognition flickered across his face, soft, uncertain, but without fear. He shifted slightly, making room beside him as though he had been expecting her. "Morning," she said gently, her voice warm but steady. That was how her father always greeted people on the porch back home. Kind, calm, never rushed. The boy nodded in return. "You live here?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. He nodded again and tapped the edge of the step with the toe of his sneaker. "My name's Micah," he said quietly, as though offering the name might be safer than offering anything else. "It's nice to meet you, Micah," she replied. She sat down beside him, folding her hands in her lap. "I wanted to thank you for what you told me yesterday. It must have been hard." Micah's shoulders tightened for a moment, but not in a way that suggested regret, more like a child bracing himself to say something adults might not believe. "I didn't know if I should," he murmured. But they looked sad. He glanced up at her. Freckles scattered across his cheeks like soft constellations. "They told me they missed their mom." Evelyn's breath caught, but she held on to the steadiness she'd brought with her. "Micah," she said softly, "can you tell me what you meant when you said you've seen them? The boys in the pictures?" He didn't speak right away. His fingers picked at the frayed strap of his backpack, and she could see a tremor of uncertainty. Children chose their timing carefully. They didn't give away what frightened them too soon. She waited. "They're in the building," he finally said. "Apartment 3B. He pointed toward the walkway that led around the side of the complex. "They don't come outside much. Sometimes I hear them through the wall, their voices, sometimes crying." Evelyn felt the air thin around her. She kept her hands still, resting gently on her knees, the way a teacher might when comforting a nervous student. "Do you see them often?" "Not really," he swallowed. "The man, he doesn't let them out a lot." "The man." Evelyn felt that word settle into her chest like a frozen stone. Micah looked up again, his eyes soft with worry. "They told me their mom used to sing to them about stars." He paused, thinking. "Lyndon said that when he can't sleep, he tries to remember it." A memory rose in Evelyn herself, sitting on the boys' bedroom floor, singing a lullaby about tiny stars drifting over the Blue Ridge Mountains, a song her own mother sang on slow summer nights. She closed her eyes, only for a moment, letting the ache roll through her. When she opened them, Micah was watching her closely, as if trying to decide whether he had done something wrong. She offered him the gentlest smile she could manage. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "You're very brave." Micah's fingers twisted into his backpack strap again. "I just don't like when people look sad," he whispered. "They always look sad." Before Evelyn could respond, he shifted the backpack onto his lap and opened the zipper halfway, pulling out a small notebook with creased corners. He held it out without explanation. Inside, on the first page, was a child's drawing 2 boys behind what looked like bars, their hands reaching out, and above them, A single word written in shaky letters. Help. Micah's voice came small and true. They asked me if I knew anyone who listens. And as Evelyn studied the drawing, the wind tugged at the trees above them, scattering brittle leaves across the walkway, as though the whole neighborhood had paused to hear what came next. Evelyn held the notebook carefully, as though it were something sacred. The drawing was rough, the lines uneven, yet it carried all the weight of a truth no child should have to shoulder. Two small figures, both reaching outward, both sketched with a kind of quiet desperation. Behind them, the bars Micah had drawn were crooked, but unmistakable. They spoke of confinement, of a place where childhood had been dimmed. She closed the notebook gently and placed it back into Micah's hands. "You did the right thing," she said, her voice softer than the rustling leaves above them. Not everyone has the courage to tell the truth, especially when it's hard. Micah's eyes flickered with something like relief. "I didn't know who else to tell. Grown-ups don't always listen." He hugged the notebook close to his chest. "But you looked like someone who would." Evelyn felt something tighten and loosen inside her all at once. It had been a long time since anyone had looked at her with trust. She shifted slightly on the step, steadying herself before she spoke again. "Micah?" she asked gently. "Do you know the man who lives with them?" Micah nodded, though he kept his gaze on the sidewalk. "He doesn't talk to anyone. He's gone a lot. And when he's home?" He tightened his grip on the notebook. "He gets loud." Evelyn kept her voice calm. "Do Aiden and Lyndon, do they ever go outside?" The boy shook his head. "Only to the back, near the trash bins. And only for a minute. They look scared." He swallowed. "Sometimes the older one tries to smile at me, but the other one just hides behind him. Aiden protecting Lyndon, just like he always did." The thought stirred something deep in her, the part of her that remembered which boy feared thunderstorms and which one always tried to be brave first. She exhaled slowly, fighting the tremor in her chest. "Have you talked to them?" she asked. "A little," Micah said. "We're not supposed to. But once, when the man wasn't looking, Lyndon gave me this." He reached into his pocket again, pulling out a small, crumpled scrap of paper. On it, in shaky pencil marks, were 4 letters. M-O-M. The letters were faint, but they hit Evelyn with the quiet force of a train she hadn't seen coming. She had to close her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of it pass through her. "He remembers," she whispered under her breath, though she wasn't sure if she meant to say it out loud. Micah looked up at her. "They talk about you sometimes. Not a lot, but enough. They said you used to make pancakes shaped like stars." He offered a small, sympathetic smile. "That sounded nice." Evelyn almost laughed, but the sound stopped somewhere in her throat. Star-shaped pancakes. She remembered flipping them on sleepy Saturday mornings, using a metal cookie cutter she had bought on clearance at a craft store. Lyndon always asked for extra blueberries. Aiden always wanted his without any fruit at all. She used to tease them that she'd switched their orders on purpose. Their giggles used to fill the kitchen. 3 years, without that sound. 3 years of silence. The wind shifted, and Micah glanced toward the building's side entrance. "They're home now," he said quietly. "I heard the door a few minutes ago. The man left right after." Evelyn followed his gaze, but saw nothing more than a narrow walkway lined with fallen leaves, and bicycles leaned against the railings. Her heart thudded painfully, every instinct pulling her toward that hallway. But she didn't move. Some thin thread of reason held her in place. Micah must have sensed her struggle. "You shouldn't go in," he said softly. "If he sees you, he gets mad even when people just walk near their window." She blinked hard, grounding herself. "I won't do anything dangerous, Micah. I promise." She paused. "I just want to understand. I just want to know they're safe." Micah's fingers fidgeted at the hem of his backpack. "They're not," he whispered. The words were so quiet she almost didn't hear them. "They don't smile. Not like kids are supposed to." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The world carried on around them, the distant sound of a dog barking, the faint rumble of a car driving down Pearson Drive, a wind chime tinkling from a porch nearby. But the space between them felt still. Finally, Micah stood, brushing the dust from his pants. He glanced once more at the side entrance, then back at her. His voice was small, but certain. "Their mom was named Evelyn. They told me that. M. The confirmation tightened her breath and steadied it at the same time. She rose slowly, meeting his gaze with a gratitude too deep for a simple thank you. "You've helped me more than you know," she said. Micah hugged his notebook to his chest again, his freckles catching in the soft morning light. "I just don't like when people look sad," he murmured. "And they always look sad." He took a step back, then another, heading toward the stairwell that led to his apartment. But before he disappeared, he looked over his shoulder one last time. "They told me their mom's name was Evelyn," he repeated, as if making sure she truly heard him. As his footsteps faded, Evelyn felt the world shift beneath her feet, because the truth echoing from a child's mouth was impossible to ignore now. Micah's quiet voice lingers as Evelyn holds the fragile drawing, because his words don't just confirm what she fears, they confirm what she hopes. By the time Evelyn reached Montfort again that afternoon, the sky had shifted to the soft gray that often settled over Asheville in late autumn. A thin mist clung to the porches and the tall oaks lining the streets, giving everything a muted, hushed quality, as though the day itself understood she was walking toward something that could break her open. She moved slowly, her breath steady but shallow, her hands buried deep in her coat pockets to hide their trembling. Apartment buildings in Montfort weren't like the crowded, modern complexes farther south. Most were old houses converted long ago, wooden railings painted over too many times, narrow stairways creaking with age, and porches decorated with wind chimes or forgotten pumpkins from last month's festival. The building Micah had pointed to was just like that. An old brick structure with ivy clinging stubbornly to the sides and a walkway that led around back. Evelyn lingered at the corner for a moment, letting the calm settle in her limbs. She knew she couldn't knock. She wasn't ready to confront anyone, not yet, and she knew how fragile truth could be when met with fear. She needed only to see, to know, to replace the ache of uncertainty with something real, even if the real thing shattered her. She took the narrow path around the side of the building, the one Micah said the boys sometimes used on their way to the trash bins. The leaves along the walkway were damp, their colors deepened by the mist. She walked with quiet steps, listening to the soft brush of her coat against her legs, the distant murmur of a radio coming from another apartment, the rhythmic hum of someone's laundry machine inside. When she reached the back corner, she stopped. The small service door to the apartment hallway opened unexpectedly, and she instinctively stepped behind the tall hedge bordering the walkway. Her breath caught in her throat, not out of fear, but something far deeper. Something like recognition before recognition. 2 boys stepped out. The older one came first. Then, with a blue sweater hanging a little too loose on his shoulders. His hair was longer now, and darker than she remembered, but it still fell in that familiar, uneven way, because he never liked sitting still for haircuts. He walked with careful, quiet steps, almost as if he'd learned to make himself small. Behind him came the younger child, his backpack almost larger than he was, his small hands gripping the straps tightly. Aiden. Lyndon. There was no mistaking them, not in any universe, not through any fog or shadow or trick of memory. She had carried those faces in her heart every day for 3 years. They were older now, worn by something heavy, but they were hers, her boys, alive. Evelyn pressed a hand over her mouth to hold back the sound rising in her chest. The world around her narrowed into a single trembling moment. The children she had buried, the children she had mourned, the children whose laughter she had replayed in her mind just to remember what hope sounded like. Aiden reached for Lyndon's hand, guiding him as they stepped down from the stoop. The gesture nearly broke her. He had always done that ever since he learned to walk. He looked around cautiously, scanning the small yard as though expecting someone to appear. When he didn't see anyone, he gently tugged his brother forward. Evelyn's heart surged forward with them, her feet nearly following without her consent. She wanted to call their names, run to them, kneel and gather them into her arms the way she used to when nightmares chased them from sleep. But her body refused to move, not from fear, but from the overwhelming weight of the moment. Then she saw him. A man stepped into the doorway behind them, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the mist. "Come on," he said. "Don't dawdle." Evelyn stiffened. She recognized that voice. She had heard it whisper promises years ago, had listened to it argue across kitchen tables, had known its tone in both tenderness and resentment. Corbin Hale. Herr Ex-Husband. He placed a hand on Aiden's shoulder, not rough, but firm, the kind of grip meant to direct rather than guide. Evelyn felt the air leave her lungs. He hadn't seen her, not behind the hedge, not through the hush of the mist. Her sons didn't look up either. They followed him without question, shoulders drawn inward, as though carrying the weight of something they didn't have words for. She couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. The simple act of watching them so close, so impossibly near, pulled her into a storm of emotion she could barely contain. The ache in her chest grew so sharp she had to steady herself against the hedge. All the questions that had haunted her since dawn fell silent in that single moment. Every doubt, every fear, every imagined possibility dissolved beneath the only truth that mattered. They were alive. They were here, and because of that, everything would change. She watched until the door closed behind them, until the hallway swallowed their small figures, and the sound of Corbin's voice faded. Only then did she let herself take a breath. Evelyn stayed hidden behind the hedge long after the door closed. Her breath shook in her chest, too shallow to steady, as if her lungs themselves were trying to catch up to what her eyes had seen. The mist drifted around her, softening the edges of the yard, making everything feel unreal, yet nothing in her life had ever been more real than this moment. Her boys, alive. For 3 years, she had carried grief like an extra heartbeat. Now that grief cracked open, leaving a raw, aching light behind it. She pressed a hand to her mouth to keep from calling out their names. Every instinct urged her forward, but every bit of caution held her in place. She couldn't risk frightening them. She couldn't risk alerting Corbin. And she couldn't risk losing the only chance she'd had to understand the truth. She stepped back from the hedge, moving quietly, slowly, her legs unsteady beneath her. The world around her seemed too loud suddenly. The thrum of a passing car, the creak of the building's old gutter, the faint bark of a dog down the street. She held her coat tightly around herself, as if the fabric alone could keep her from collapsing. What mattered now was simple. She had seen them. She knew they were here. Whatever lies Corbin had told, whatever story had convinced everyone, including her, that the boys were gone, none of it could stand against what she had witnessed with her own eyes. Evelyn walked away from the building, each step careful but driven by a growing resolve. She didn't have a plan yet. She didn't have answers. But the photographs were no longer just clues. They were proof she hadn't imagined what grief tried to erase. And Micah's words were no longer a fragile whisper from a child. They were truth confirmed by the sight of 2 small figures stepping into the mist. As she reached the end of the walkway, she paused one last time, turning back toward the building. The windows reflected the gray afternoon light, quiet and unreadable. Somewhere behind those panes, her sons were breathing, living, waiting in ways they didn't even understand. Evelyn swallowed hard. Everything she thought she had buried had risen again, and now there was no going back. The late afternoon light faded into a bluish dusk as Evelyn made her way toward Rowan Sinclair's house. She walked slowly, her steps steady, but her mind racing. The quiet neighborhood around Chestnut Street felt peaceful, porch lights glowing softly, wind chimes tapping against the gentle breeze, the smell of wood smoke drifting from chimneys. But inside Evelyn, the world was still trembling. Seeing the boys had changed everything. The memory replayed again and again. Aiden guiding Lyndon down the steps, their small shoulders hunched, Corbin's voice behind them like a cold shadow. She clung to those images with equal parts awe and sorrow. Even as she walked, her fingers brushed the Polaroids in her coat pocket, as if to confirm they still existed, that this wasn't just a cruel dream. Rowan's home sat on a quiet corner, a white bungalow with wide steps and a porch swing that creaked softly in the wind. Lights glowed warmly inside. Evelyn paused before knocking, letting the warmth through the windows prepare her for what needed to be said. She had known Rowan only in passing, a polite neighbor who taught law at the university downtown, someone she greeted during morning walks but never truly talked to. But today, she needed more than a neighbor. When Rowan opened the door, her expression shifted immediately from mild curiosity to quiet concern. "Evelyn," she said gently, "come in, honey. You look chilled." Inside, the house smelled of cinnamon tea and something faintly citrus. A lamp glowed in the corner, casting a soft warmth across the living room. Evelyn stepped in, suddenly aware of how cold her hands were. "Sit down," Rowan urged, motioning to the sofa. Let me get you something warm. Ugh. Evelyn nodded, though words refused to come at first. She sat, clasping her hands together to stop their trembling. Rowan returned with 2 steaming mugs, setting one in front of her before settling into the armchair across from her. Tell me what's going on, Rowan said kindly. You're shaking. For a moment, Evelyn simply stared into the rising steam, trying to find a place to begin. But the truth pressed at her chest until it found its way out. Rowan, she said softly. I saw them. My boys. Rowan's posture shifted, not disbelief, not dismissal, but a deepening attention. You saw them? Evelyn nodded. Micah, the little boy from the building near Montford, he told me he knew them. I didn't believe it at first, but today he showed me their drawings, their handwriting, and then, her voice wavered. Then I saw them with my own eyes. They walked out the back door. Rowan leaned forward. Evelyn, slow down. Are you sure? She pulled the Polaroids from her coat pocket and set them gently on the coffee table. Under the warm lamplight, the images looked even starker. The dim room, the thin shoulders, the boys' haunted faces. Rowan stared at them for several long seconds, then exhaled slowly through her nose. These are your sons, she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Evelyn nodded, tears rising, but held back with effort. I thought they were gone. For 3 years, Rowan, I stood at that grave every week. And today, I saw them alive. The older woman reached out and rested her hand over Evelyn's. Sweetheart, she murmured, no mother should carry a pain like that. Not for a day, let alone for years. For the first time since leaving the cemetery, Evelyn felt something steady under her again. Rowan's voice held a calm strength, the kind that soothed without softening the truth. Tell me everything, Rowan said gently. From the beginning. Oh. So Evelyn told her the phone call from Corbin 3 years ago. The rushed funeral, the closed casket, the way no one had been allowed to look. She told her about the child's words at the grave, the photos slipped between flower stems, the trembling steps she took behind the hedge at the Montford building. She didn't spare a detail, even when her voice broke. Through it all, Rowan listened without interrupting, her expression shifting slowly from concern to something firmer, sharper, a quiet fire forming beneath her calm. When Evelyn finally finished, the room fell silent. The only sound was the soft tick of the old wall clock and the faint whistle of wind against the window pane. Rowan sat back in her chair, took a measured breath, and then said with calm conviction. Rowan took a long breath, letting the weight of Evelyn's story settle between them. The softness in her eyes didn't fade, but something steadier rose beneath it, an understanding shaped by years of seeing how truth could be twisted and how families could be torn apart by the wrong hands. Evelyn, she said gently, you're not imagining things, and you're not losing your mind. She tapped the Polaroids with 2 fingers. These pictures, a child bringing them to you, and you seeing the boys yourself, none of that is coincidence. Evelyn looked down, her hands tightening around the warm mug. I don't know what to do, she whispered. If I go to the police with this, they'll think I'm grieving too hard, or imagining things. Corbin could deny everything. That's why we won't go in unprepared, Rowan replied. Her voice was calm, the kind that steadied the space around her. We need proof, real, irrefutable proof. Once we have that, no one can dismiss you. Not Corbin, not the police, not a judge. Evelyn swallowed, her pulse quickening. Proof, she echoed. But how? I can't get close to them. I can't even knock on the door without risking everything. Rowan gave a small, reassuring nod. You won't do this alone. We'll find someone who can help us gather what we need, records, background checks, whatever trail Corbin left behind. And we'll build from there. She paused, her voice softening. Your boys are alive, sweetheart. That means hope is alive. But we have to move carefully. The words steadied something inside Evelyn, like a hand placed firmly on her back. She let out a trembling breath and nodded. Come by tomorrow, Rowan said. We'll start with what we can verify, and then we'll figure out the rest. When Evelyn stepped back outside, the cold air wrapped around her instantly, but this time it didn't feel as heavy. Porch lights flickered on across the neighborhood. A couple walked their dog down the sidewalk. Somewhere nearby, a wind chime sang a thin, hopeful melody. She stood there for a long moment, looking up at the dim evening sky. The mist had thinned, giving way to a faint streak of blue. For the first time in years, she felt something warm settle in her chest, small, fragile, but undeniably alive. The night deepens around Chestnut Street as Evelyn walks home with Rowan's promise echoing gently, because the first real step toward truth has finally been taken. The morning air over Asheville carried a cold clarity as Evelyn followed Rowan up the narrow stairs to Callum Price's apartment. She hadn't slept, but her steps felt steadier than the day before. Knowing the boys were alive had given her a different kind of strength, quiet, sharp, and impossible to shake. Callum opened the door before they knocked. He looked younger than she expected, soft-spoken, glasses slightly askew, a mug of coffee warming his hands. Inside, his small living room hummed with computer screens and quiet jazz drifting from a speaker. "Come in," he said gently. "Rowan told me this is important." Evelyn laid the Polaroids on the table. Callum leaned over them, studying each detail with a careful eye. "These were taken recently," he said after a moment. "Maybe months, not years." A tremor moved through her. "So they're real?" "They're real," he confirmed. "And recent." Rowan folded her arms, her voice steady. "We need to know who this man is now, what name he's using." Callum turned to his laptop. "Let's start with Corbin Hale." He searched quietly public records, licenses, archived documents. Within minutes, his brows pulled together. His trail goes cold 3 years ago. No address, no activity. Almost like someone erased him. Evelyn's hands tightened. Because he changed his name. Callum didn't dismiss it. He typed faster, following faint digital traces most people would overlook. Then, suddenly, he stopped. "There's a recent ID created 2 years ago," he murmured. "Same age, same physical description. Filed through a remote kiosk. No fingerprint, no photo verification. That's suspicious." "What name?" Rowan asked. Callum angled the screen toward them. "Marcus Lorne." Evelyn stared at the false name, her breath catching. She'd seen it before on a misplaced piece of mail in Montfort, months ago. "He didn't leave town," Callum said quietly. "He just hid." The room fell still. Evelyn felt a slow, heavy understanding settle over her. All this time, her sons had been living only blocks away. Not lost, not buried. Taken. Callum closed the laptop gently. "This is the first thread," he said. "And we'll pull the rest." Evelyn held the Polaroids in her hand again. The name Marcus Lorne echoing through her mind as something inside her hardened not with bitterness, but with resolve. Callum shifted to another screen, his fingers moving with a quiet precision. "If he built a false identity," he said, "there will be more signs. Documents rush through, mismatched data, records with gaps. People can hide faces, but they rarely hide their paperwork well." He clicked through employment logs, cross-checked addresses, then paused again. "Here, this ID. Marcus Lorne was used to apply for work at a distribution warehouse in East Asheville. Night shifts only. Someone trying to avoid attention." Rowan leaned over his shoulder. "Anything tying him to the Montfort apartment?" Callum nodded. "Several digital purchases from grocery stores within walking distance. And..." He pulled up another file, frowning. "Mail forwarding records show a temporary hold last winter. People do that when they're afraid someone might find them." Evelyn felt her stomach tighten. Every new detail sharpened the picture. Corbin hiding in plain sight, living under a borrowed name, keeping the boys out of sight while the world believed they were gone. Callum sat back. "This is enough to raise suspicion," he said gently. "But not enough for the police. We'll need something stronger." Evelyn swallowed. "Stronger?" "Something that proves he's keeping them there. Something that shows he isn't who he says he is." His gaze softened. "But we're getting close." Rowan touched Evelyn's arm, grounding her. "This is what building a case looks like. One truth at a time." She nodded at Callum. "We'll come back once we have more." Callum offered a small, sympathetic smile. "I'll keep digging. There's always something people overlook." Evelyn stood, feeling the shift inside her fear, giving way to clarity. She picked up the Polaroids, holding them as carefully as she had the first time she saw them, but now they felt heavier with possibility. Rowan walked her out into the cold hallway. "We're not done," she said softly. And today was a real step forward. Outside, the air held the faint smell of roasted coffee drifting from Haywood Road. Cars moved slowly through the thin morning light, the world unchanged despite everything that had shifted in Evelyn's life. But she felt it deep, steady, undeniable. Under the glow of a street lamp, she looked at the name Callum had found, the one that would unravel everything. Marcus Lorne. The sight of it made her breath catch, because that single name proved he'd never left Asheville at all. The afternoon drifted into a quiet, cool stillness as Evelyn made her way back toward the Montfort building. The sky hung low with soft gray clouds, the kind that promised an early evening. She walked slowly, hands deep in her coat pockets, the weight of the Polaroids and the new name Marcus Lorne resting against her side like a quiet pulse. For the first time in 3 years, her steps felt guided by something more than grief. They felt guided by purpose. When she reached the familiar sidewalk outside the brick apartment building, she wasn't entirely sure why she'd come back. Maybe it was the need to be close to her sons, even if she couldn't see them. Maybe it was the hope of finding something she'd missed earlier. But as she approached, she saw a small figure perched on the low concrete step, the same step where she'd first spoken to him. Micah sat there with his backpack pulled into his lap, picking at a loose thread on the shoulder strap. He looked up as she neared, recognition brightening his tired expression. "You came back," he said quietly. "I wasn't sure I would," Evelyn admitted. "But I guess my feet decided for me." Micah gave a small, sympathetic smile. "That happens to me sometimes, especially when I'm thinking too much." She sat beside him, the concrete cool beneath her. The neighborhood felt hushed, as if waiting porch lights flicking on early. A single wind chime singing from a balcony above. A few leaves drifted in slow spirals to the ground. "Are they home now?" she asked gently. Micah nodded. "I heard them earlier, not talking, just moving around." He hesitated. "They move really quiet." Evelyn swallowed the ache rising in her throat. "They always used to stomp around the house, little thunderclouds." She smiled softly at the memory, then let it fade. Micah looked down at his hands. "People don't stomp when they're scared." The truth of that simple sentence hung between them. After a moment, he reached into his backpack again. This time, he didn't pull out a drawing, but something wrapped in a small plastic bag, a child's sweatshirt, gray and worn at the cuffs. "I found this," he said. "It was on the clothesline out back. I think it belongs to the younger one, Lyndon." Evelyn touched the fabric through the plastic, her breath faltering. She remembered that sweatshirt, not the item itself, but the style. She used to buy soft cotton because Lyndon hated scratchy textures. The thought of him wearing something that familiar made her chest ache with tenderness she had no place to pour. "I shouldn't have taken it," Micah whispered. "But it was just hanging there, and nobody saw." "You were helping," she said softly. "Helping more than you know." The boy let out a tiny sigh of relief. He glanced around to be sure no one was close, then leaned a little nearer. "Sometimes, when the man leaves for work, they go into the kitchen and look out the window, just for a few seconds." He pointed up toward a small side window partly hidden by a vine-covered wall. Right there, Evelyn followed his gaze, her heart tightening. That window was closer than she'd realized. Close enough that if she stood in the right place, she might catch a glimpse if luck allowed. If the boys dared look out at the exact moment she was there. "Do they ever talk to you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Only a little," Micah shrugged. "They're not supposed to. But once, the older one asked me if I knew what day it was." He paused. I think he was trying to remember something. A birthday? A holiday? A memory he'd lost in the dark corners of a life he shouldn't have been living? Evelyn looked at Micah with a fragile hope she didn't try to hide. "Why are you helping me?" she asked softly. He lifted one shoulder. "Because they're sad," he said simply. "And you're sad too. And I don't like when people are sad." The wind shifted then, scattering a few dry leaves across the walkway. Evelyn reached out and touched his shoulder lightly. "You're a good kid, Micah." He looked down, suddenly shy. But when he lifted his gaze to her again, his eyes held something deeper, something truthful and young and unbearably gentle. "They told me their mom used to sing," he murmured. "And they miss her voice." "Oh." The words settled inside Evelyn like a tremor. Before she could speak, Micah reached into his backpack once more, pulling out a small folded piece of paper, another drawing. 2 stick-figure boys holding hands, standing under a window, and below them, in uneven letters, "Someday." Evelyn folded the small drawing carefully, as though it might crumble if touched too firmly. The late afternoon had deepened into a cool blue-gray, the kind of quiet light that made every sound feel sharper. A car door shut somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice, and the wind rustled the branches overhead like someone turning a page. Micah zipped his backpack, but didn't stand. He seemed to be turning something over in his mind, his brows pulling together the way children do when a truth feels too big for them. "There's something else," he murmured. Evelyn waited, steady and patient. He glanced toward the building, lowering his voice. Sometimes, when the man leaves for work, they sit at the kitchen table with a little radio. They turn the dial slowly, like they're trying to find a sound they remember. Evelyn pressed a hand to her chest as a quiet ache spread through her. Her boys had grown up with music, simple lullabies, old folk songs she used to hum while folding laundry or washing dishes. The thought of them searching for a melody that reminded them of home felt both heartbreaking and strangely hopeful. Micah continued. "Yesterday, the little one Lyndon, he hummed something. Not loud, just a little." He hesitated. It sounded sad. Evelyn closed her eyes, imagining Lyndon's small shoulders, his lips forming a tune without knowing why. She wondered if memory lived inside him like a faint lantern, flickering even in places where love had been buried. When she opened her eyes, Micah was watching her with earnest worry. "Are you okay?" "Yes," she whispered. "Because of you." "Ugh." The boy looked down, scuffing his shoe against the concrete. "I just thought someone should help." "You did more than that," she said. "You gave me something to hold on to." A soft rumble sounded from the far end of the parking lot, a familiar engine. Micah stiffened and grabbed his backpack straps. "That's him," he whispered. "He's home early." Evelyn's breath caught. A dark pickup truck turned into the lot, slowing as it approached the building. Even from a distance, she recognized the way the driver sat, shoulders tense, posture rigid. The old Corbin buried beneath the new name, Marcus Lorne. Micah's eyes darted between the truck and Evelyn. "You should go," he urged softly. "He doesn't like people hanging around." Evelyn rose slowly, her pulse quickening. She stepped back toward the sidewalk, forcing her breaths to stay even. Micah slipped inside the building just as the truck parked. The engine clicked as it cooled, and a man stepped out bigger than she remembered. Older, but unmistakably him. He didn't see her, but she saw everything. The worn jacket, the hurried way he checked over his shoulder, the keys clenched too tightly in his hand. And then, from the second-floor window, a small face appeared for just a second. An outline, a silhouette she knew by heart. Before her mind could catch up, the curtain fell back into place. The morning in Asheville unfolded with a pale, gentle light, the kind that slipped quietly across rooftops and made the world feel softer than it was. Evelyn woke before sunrise, her mind still clinging to the faint silhouette she'd seen the night before. One small face behind a curtain, just a second, but enough to burn its shape into her memory. Rowan met her on the porch with 2 steaming cups of coffee.
"You look like you didn't sleep,"
she said softly. "I didn't," Evelyn admitted, wrapping her hands around the cup. "I saw one of them, just for a moment." Rowan nodded, not startled, not dismissive, only steady. "Then today, we moved closer." They walked side by side to Callum's apartment. The streets were quiet, lined with dog walkers and early risers sweeping porches. A church bell chimed in the distance, 3 short notes that reminded Evelyn of Sunday mornings she once took for granted. Callum opened his door with a gentle, almost apologetic smile. "I was about to email you," he said. "I found something." Inside, the glow of his computer screens lit the small room. Papers covered the coffee table addresses, names, data prints. Evelyn's heart thudded as he pointed to a file. "This is the employment log for Marcus Lorne," he explained. "He works a night shift at the warehouse, and he usually comes home between 4:30 and 5 a.m. He paused. "But something odd came up when I traced his old identity." He clicked open another record. "It wasn't just a new name he created," Callum said quietly. "He filed a full change of residence form that never went through official verification, meaning," his voice lowered, "meaning he hid the boys on paperwork too. He marked them as non-existent minors." Evelyn felt the air go thin. Rowan leaned forward. So the system doesn't have them listed anywhere? Callum nodded. Exactly. As far as his fake documents say, those kids don't exist at all. A soft, uneasy silence filled the room. Evelyn pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. The idea that her own children were hidden on paper vanished by a few keystrokes made her chest burn with quiet outrage. Callum continued gently. But there's more. I checked the building records. His apartment has one external security camera pointed at the back entrance. He tapped a drawn map. The boys use that route occasionally. If we time it right, we might get visual proof. Rowan exhaled. Finally, Evelyn swallowed, the mix of hope and fear tightening inside her. What do we do? Callum folded his hands. We set up across the street, at the coffee shop on the corner. From that angle, we have a clear view of the back pathway and part of the kitchen window. If the boys appear, even for a second, we capture it. The simplicity of the plan made her heart flutter. 3 years of searching. 3 years of mourning, now reduced to a few seconds they hoped would happen. We can try tonight, Callum said. He works again. The boys will be alone for part of the evening. Alone. The word hit Evelyn with a strange combination of fear and opportunity. Rowan touched her arm gently. This is our best chance yet. Evelyn nodded, steadying her breath. Then we'll be there. Callum gave a small, encouraging smile. I'll set up the equipment. Oh. As Evelyn stepped outside again, the morning sun finally broke through the clouds and cast light across the cracked sidewalk. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a shadow of herself. She felt like a mother walking toward truth. By early evening, Asheville settled into a calm, dusky glow. Street lights blinked on one by one, casting warm halos across the sidewalks. Evelyn sat inside the small corner cafe facing the Montfort apartments, a paper cup of chamomile tea warming her hands. Rowan sat beside her, and Callum worked quietly at a laptop, adjusting the small camera pointed discreetly toward the back path of the building. The cafe was peaceful. A couple reading newspapers, a barista humming softly, the slow, steady rhythm of spoons against ceramic. It all contrasted sharply with the fluttering tension inside Evelyn's chest. Everything's in place, Callum murmured. Now we wait. Evelyn nodded, though waiting felt like the hardest part. The faint glow from the apartment window across the street pulled her gaze again and again. Every few minutes, she imagined silhouettes moving behind the glass shapes she prayed would become real. Time passed gently. Cars rolled by. People walked dogs. The aroma of fresh pastries drifted from behind the counter. Still, the kitchen window remained still. Rowan watched her closely. You're doing better than I expected, she said softly. Most people would be pacing. I'm pacing on the inside, Evelyn admitted with a fragile smile. They fell into a quiet stretch, each minute feeling longer than the last. Then Callum suddenly leaned forward. There, he whispered. Evelyn's breath caught as she followed his gaze. A small shadow appeared in the kitchen window, hesitant, then clearer. A child's shape, a tiny hand pressing against the glass for balance. Then another figure joined him, shorter, rounding the corner of the frame. Evelyn's heart trembled. Hold on, Callum murmured, adjusting the zoom. The older boy stepped into view long enough that the low cafe light caught a faint glimmer of his hair. The younger one stood beside him, barely reaching the sill. They weren't speaking, but their presence alone filled the room with a soft electricity. A second later, the older boy lifted something close to the window. A small radio. Evelyn clutched the edge of the table. That's them, she whispered. Rowan placed a steady hand on her back. Callum clicked the capture button. Got it. But just as the shutter sound snapped, something changed. A quick movement. A curtain shifting. A shadow crossing behind them. The boy startled and disappeared from view in an instant. Callum froze. Rowan tensed. Evelyn felt her breath stop completely. Because the shadow that moved behind them, the shape crossing the kitchen, was far too large to be a child, and far too early for Marcus to be home. Someone else was in that apartment. The moment the larger shadow crossed behind the boys, Evelyn felt every muscle in her body lock. The warm hum of the cafe faded, replaced by the sharp rush of her heartbeat. Rowan leaned forward, eyes narrowed toward the window, while Callum replayed the short clip on his laptop with careful fingers. That wasn't Marcus, Callum murmured. He's not off his shift yet, Rowan added quietly. Evelyn swallowed hard. Then who is it? None of them had an answer. The uncertainty carried its own kind of heaviness, quiet, cold, unsettling. Callum zoomed the captured clip. The figure in the background was blurry, but unmistakably adult. Broad-shouldered, moving with a deliberate slowness that chilled Evelyn more than anger would have. They weren't alone, she whispered. He left them with someone. Rowan set a steady hand on Evelyn's arm. We don't jump to the worst. It could be a sitter, a neighbor, but it could also be someone he trusts to keep them hidden, Callum said softly. The thought settled like a weight on the table. Evelyn looked again toward the apartment building. The window was dark now, the curtain still. A sense of distance, physical, emotional, impossible, hung between her and the boys like a locked door. We should take this to the police, she said, voice trembling but firm. Rowan shook her head gently. Not yet. We need to know who that person is first. If we go too early, Marcus could panic. He could disappear again. Evelyn closed her eyes, steadying her breath. She knew Rowan was right, but the uncertainty gnawed at her. Callum typed quickly. There's one more thing we can do tonight, he said. The building has a back alley camera owned by the city. If the boys ever go outside with that person, the footage might show both of them together. He looked up, and that could be the final piece. Evelyn didn't speak. She simply nodded. They packed up and stepped into the cool night. A breeze drifted down the street, carrying the faint scent of pine from the ridge above the neighborhood. Streetlights flickered softly on the asphalt as they walked toward the municipal records office, quiet, steady steps into deeper truth. But halfway down the block, Evelyn stopped. In the stillness of the night, she heard something faint. A soft, familiar melody carried on the air, like a thread of memory unraveling. A child humming. Her heart tightened. It was coming from the alley behind the Montfort building. Evelyn froze in the middle of the quiet street, her breath catching. The soft humming drifted again, faint, unsure, but unmistakably a child's voice. Rowan and Callum turned toward the sound, their expressions sharpening with the same realization. It's coming from the alley, Evelyn whispered. They moved carefully, footsteps slow and silent across the pavement. The alley behind the Montfort building was narrow, lit by a single weak bulb mounted above a service door. A few trash bins lined the wall, their shadows long in the dim light. And then she saw them. Two small figures huddled near the back steps, one sitting, one standing guard in that brave, protective way older siblings often learned too early. The younger boy hummed the same fragile tune, the one Evelyn used to hum while tucking them in. Her knees nearly gave out. Rowan touched her arm, caution in her voice. Slow, Evelyn. If you rush, you might scare them. But Evelyn didn't move closer. She just watched, her heart swelling and breaking all at once. The boys looked thinner, older in ways children shouldn't be, their innocence weathered by secrets no child should hold. Suddenly, the older boy, Lyndon, turned his head slightly, sensing something. His eyes swept the shadows. Not frightened. Searching. Callum whispered. He hears something. Evelyn pressed a hand to her chest. Her voice came out barely audible. He used to do that. When he couldn't sleep, he'd listen for me. A moment later, the building's back door creaked. The adult shadow from earlier stepped out, checking the alley. The boys tensed instantly, the humming cutting off. Rowan whispered sharply, "We need to stay hidden." The man spoke in a low voice, impatient but not loud. Inside, now. The older boy hesitated just a blink, then guided his brother up the steps and through the door. It shut behind them with a soft click. Silence settled, heavy and raw. Callum exhaled shakily. But we got it. The footage. 2 kids, an adult. Enough to question everything. Rowan nodded. And with the window footage, this ties it together. Evelyn wiped her cheek, not realizing she'd been crying. They're alive, she whispered. Really alive. Rowan placed a steady arm around her shoulders. And now we can bring them home. They walked back toward the main street, the night air cool against their faces. The boys' humming still echoed faintly in Evelyn's mind like a small, fragile promise. At the corner, beneath a street lamp's warm glow, Evelyn paused. She looked back at the building one last time. The window was dark, the alley still, but hope pulsed there, bright and unwavering. Everything was ready. The evidence. The truth. The next steps. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. Tonight, she let herself believe fully and without fear that her family could be whole again. Sometimes, when a long night finally breaks into morning, the world feels softer than we remember. And that's how Evelyn's story came to rest quietly, like a tired heart, learning how to beat again. She walked through fear, through doubt, through the shadows of the past, and still managed to reach the place where truth finally met love. In the end, it wasn't anger or force that opened the way home, just the steady courage of a mother and the unexpected kindness of those who chose to walk beside her. You know, stories like this linger a bit. They stay in the room even after the last page is turned. Maybe it's because many of us, especially as we get older, know what it means to lose something or someone and spend years hoping for a second chance. And when Evelyn heard her boys humming in the quiet alleyway, it wasn't just a moment of recognition. It was the sound of the past reaching forward to meet the future, the sound of a broken family choosing to heal. The lesson is simple, but strong. Love steady, patient, unconditional, has the power to rebuild what was once shattered. And redemption doesn't always come with grand gestures. Sometimes it arrives softly, the way a child's voice drifts down a hallway, reminding us that hope never truly disappears. Just like a porch light left on through the years, even the smallest act of kindness can guide us through the darkest turns of life. In the quiet corners of American towns over Sunday dinners, in family photos tucked behind refrigerator magnets, in the soft laughter of grandchildren, we're reminded that everyone deserves a place to belong, that no matter our age, our regrets, or the chapters we wish we could rewrite, we're never too far from a chance to begin again. Because happiness grows when we choose to live not just for ourselves, but for the people whose lives touch ours in ways we don't always see. So tonight, as you sit with this story, maybe with a warm cup by your side or the glow of a lamp filling the room, take a moment to reflect. If this journey touched your heart even a little, leave a 1-inch the comments. If it didn't, or if you feel something could be better, just press 0. Your voice matters too. And if this tale brought you a bit of comfort, I hope you'll stay a while, because there are more stories waiting, gentle ones, filled with hope, meant to remind us that even in the later seasons of life, love still knows the way home.